Now, games have a great way of settling players into a rhythm. Once the tutorial is done and dusted, gamers are usually expected to pull off the same mechanics ad nauseum to finish a game. But sometimes a game will pull something so massively out there, so off the beaten path, that it throws us entirely for a loop. Whatever the case is, these examples show on this list that it can range from one little tweak in a mission to a full-blown changing gameplay. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 out-of-nowhere video game transformations. Number 10. Assassin's Creed 3 – Who's Really Good and Evil? Right up until the release of Assassin's Creed 3, players were led to believe that they'd only play as Connor throughout, so expectations were slightly subverted when you start as his father. His dad comes across as a wonderful, lovely assassin in the game's prologue. That is, until a "say what" moment sees him inducted as a Templar instead. That in itself is a pretty massive twist. Well done, Assassin's Creed, for hoodwinking us so early on. But it's what comes next that changes the game entirely. When playing as his dad, other members of his order come across as decent, honourable people, yet when it switches to Connor, so do his and our perceptions of them. Charles Lee, for example, is normal and full of good intention in his dad's eyes, but as Connor, he's as sinister as Captain Hook, complete with disgusting mannerisms. It's not comically obvious, but it is noticeable over time. Whilst the Templar twist is renowned, it's how we see certain characters from differing perspectives afterwards that is a surprisingly neat and subtle transformation. Number 9. Batman Arkham Knight Tunnel Chase. It would be fair to say that the Batmobile/Bat-Tank sections in Arkham Knight were pretty divisive. Whilst they did distract from the main Batman gameplay established 3 games prior, they were pretty samey. Drive to an arena, transform into a tank, then commence strafing about whilst taking out drones. It happens more than it needs to, but it's rinse and repeat with those bits. That is until Batman chases the Arkham Knight underground. Thinking, it'll just be another Batman circling around while shooting at the Knight, players were definitely in for a shock here. The Knight isn't a tank, as he's in a massive piece of tunneling equipment. Thanks to this huge drilling vehicle, gameplay then switches to a hide and seek, with Batman becoming the Bat Mouse in this scenario. And when spotted, it gets even worse. Faced with death if it catches him, Batman has to lead definitely not Jason Todd down labyrinthine tunnels 3 separate times to damage him. The last time a Batman game had a chase sequence, it involved slapping Croc into the sewers with a batarang. This section, on the other hand, played out kind of like a weakened version of Armored Core, and thus took many by surprise. Number 8. Max Payne Maximum Frustration. Chances are that even if a gamer hasn't played any of the Max Payne games, they'll at least have heard of them. Often compared to The Matrix, Payne is synonymous with action and diving around, spraying bullets, and definitely with slow motion coolness. But it's not normally remembered as, oh yeah, Max Payne the platformer, and what I will detail next is often referred to with disdain, just because of grim recollection of how suddenly out of place it was. The horrible moment is none other than the nightmare sequences that involve Max following a narrow trail of blood, so narrow in fact that falling off causes the progress to be reset. It's been covered many a time, true, but its inclusion here is to highlight not just the difficulty or frustration therein, it's to show how massively divergent it was to the main game. In the main game, Max is encouraged to dive about to avoid being shot. Here, that concept is death. Jumping is precision here, and failure is a knife's edge. Number 7. Dead Rising 2 – Noxious Zombies. The first Dead Rising, Capcom's other zombie franchise, may allegedly not have been inspired by Dawn of the Dead, but the zombies were definitely the same. So when Dead Rising 2 came out, the undead largely went unchanged, or so the game lulls players into thinking. Much like the first one, there's an overtime mode in the sequel, which leads to a proper ending pathway, and changes up certain parameters like a tighter time constraint and harder objectives. In Dead Rising 2's case, that also includes a new type of zombie as well, one that produces more gas than a pure sprout diet and will incapacitate Chuck if he's too close. It changed the game up somewhat, as players had to be cautious about going and swinging, lest the shambler in question gas out our hero, leading to them being munched on. Tactics and planning were necessary now, which goes against the carnage-based attitude that had been instilled in players for most of the game. Number 6. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Guided by Voices. After the dismal reception to Square Enix's Avengers game, which let's just all agree wasn't great at all, the pressure was definitely on for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. Could it surpass that mess and carry over the goofiness of the films? Well, thankfully, yes. For the most part, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is a run-of-the-mill shooter, but what makes it enjoyable is the lightness of tone and fun that the team mostly have, which hits its peak with the Space Llama sing-along moment. Yeah, you heard me right. Long story short, the Guardians are all locked in their bedrooms like grounded teenagers, and their only hope of escape is the space llama that they acquired at the beginning of the game. The catch though, it doesn't listen to simple commands. What it does respond to, however, is the crew singing. Using a combination of repulsion and attraction, especially the former with Gamora, players will need to direct the creature around the ship's lounge, to the tune of "Don't worry, be happy," no less. It's a completely one-off moment that makes no sense in this explanation granted. It is truly a see it to believe it moment, and it was a definitely unexpected moment of levity in a game already stuffed to the brim with them. Number 5. Elden Ring, Godric's new arm. Soulsborne games, as they're colloquially known, are renowned for having a large and extravagant boss battle from time to time, such as the extent that when a player knocks off a third or half of a life bar, they know to expect something worse is coming. Fortunately, or not, depending on your enjoyment, Elden Ring doesn't disappoint in that regard. Margaret the Fell is the first main boss and pulls out some new tricks out of the bag, but that is nothing compared to Godric the Grafted. Sprouting many limbs true to his namesake, Godric is a multi-armed menace in the first half, but when it's whittled down to half of his health, things start to get weird, as in hacks one of his left arms off levels of weird. Like some sort of bio-Lego man, Godric then proceeds to add a fire-breathing dragon's head as a replacement, which certainly turns up the heat in the fight. I'm sorry I had to put that pun in there. It definitely changes the dynamic of the fight as well, adding fire attacks and burning ground to the already chaotic second boss fight in the game. Number 4. Shadows of the Damned, and Justine for all. There was a lot riding on Shadows of the Damned before its release, with the likes of Shinji Mikami, Suda51 and Akira Yamaoka behind it. It had a fair weight of expectation to live up to, and for the most part, it did. Playing kind of like a hybrid of Resident Evil 4 and No More Heroes, it was an entertaining romp through the world of demons that was backed by the chap behind Silent Hill's creepy tunes, but it wasn't without its weirdness either. And no, we're not going to be talking about the big boner bit, don't worry, we're going to be talking about something else. We're talking about the boss fight against the mute Justine, which dramatically shifts the gameplay tone completely. Up until this point, it had played, well, kind of like Resident Evil 4, so it'd be fair to say that no one was expecting a Cuphead-style switch to a side-scrolling shooter. It's not game-breakingly difficult, nor a terrible portion of the game, it's just massively out of nowhere for a game established as an already over-the-shoulder shooter. Number 3. Final Fantasy VII Remake Dance Dance Avalanche. In the various worlds of Final Fantasy games, minigames and wackiness are no strangers. The original Dress Hunt in Final Fantasy VII, for example, had players take part in several light-hearted games in order to win components, and whilst those are carried over to the 2020 remake, they're still done with that pseudo-serious tone the first part of many had plastered all over it. That is, until Cloud needs a makeover. After finally getting an audience with the illustrious crime boss, Cloud is put through his paces, but not in combat or fitness. Instead, it's a dance-off. And not just any ordinary dance-off, as the Honeybee Inn becomes a stage straight out of the likes of Dance Dance Revolution and plays very similar to one. With a camera panning around a ballroom-like scene in Beauty and the Beast, players can easily get distracted watching the dance-off instead of hitting their prompts. In a game as serious as this remake, it comes out of nowhere, but at the same time, it is so much fun, and a moment that you're not going to be forgetting anytime soon. Number 2. Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, the Third Dimension? It was going to be a hard one making a follow-up to the best Mario game of all time, let's face it, Super Mario World, but you know what? They bloody well did it. This time around, players hopped, skipped, and their way through stages as one of many Yoshis transporting a baby Mario away from the forces of Kamek. Gameplay is mostly derivative of any other Mario game prior, with the exception, pun definitely intended, being Yoshi's firing power. Each Yoshi can swallow enemies to make them into eggs, which can then be launched at other enemies, and all of this is aimed along a 2D axis, which is pretty easy enough, and come the end of the game you'll be pulling off trick shots coming off from all sorts of angles. That is until the last boss. Throwing all of that easy aiming out of the window, the game has players hoof eggs at a distance closing baby Bowser, who's in the background, meaning that the aiming and trajectory go full 3D. No more flat screen firing, there was an element of depth and trajectory now, all the while the impending threat was getting closer and closer. It certainly adds some danger to the whole final boss thing, that is for sure. And number 1, Resident Evil 4. Head show? No, that is definitely worse. It's been used as a comparison in some entries already, but here is the ultra example of good lord, I was not expecting that. Resident Evil 4 already defied convention by changing its largely established series style, but with that came a caveat. We were always taught to aim for the head. When it came to over-the-shoulder aiming, that definitely made things easier. Surely these villagers/Ganados would go down a lot easier, right? Well, you'd like to think so, but just imagine the collective surprise a few hours in when a player nails a perfect headshot on a pitchfork-wielding peasant and it just explodes into as something akin to John Carpenter's The Thing. It was genuinely terrifying to say the least, and it also meant that the villagers were now ditching the shambling aesthetic for one of quicker, hive-minded consciousness and sharp appendages. It seemed like Capcom really were trying to shake the established lore and succeeded. No slow zombies here, just a parasitic ailment that meant that Leon definitely had his work cut out for him. Tactics revised, new scares introduced. This was Resident Evil 4 telling us that the game had changed indeed. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 out of nowhere video game transformations. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. And if you want to chat to me further, you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there, my friends. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Even though we detailed today a lot about shocking transformations in video games and their characters, it can always be a good thing to look at ourselves from time to time and look to grow both spiritually, mentally, or physically, depending on what your goals are. It can be difficult from time to time to change what we know, but just remember, you're not alone in trying to live a healthier and happier life, which is, at the end of the day, all I want for you. So remember that friends, family, professionals in the support industry, these are people that can help you achieve your goals and go on to live a happier life. Big love to you, my friend. Now go out there and smash it. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.